Welcome to 78.4, the podcast that helps you leave a godly legacy for future generations by showing you incredible things God has done in the lives of men and women around the world. If He can do those things in these people's lives, imagine what He can do in yours. I'm Bob.
And I'm Matt. So Bob.
Yes, sir.
Last week, we had, I think, a really powerful discussion on suffering.
Yep.
And how we can better deal with it when it happens to us. But what should we do when it's happening to someone around us?
Well, that's a toughie.
Specifically someone who's grieving, dealing with, the heaviness of loss, and you see them suffering. What do you do?
That's a tough one.
What do you say? Nothing? Quote Bible verses at them about heaven, rapid fire.
Oh, that works well.
That always is a winner. And do you bring out the Shakespeare? Parting is such sweet. No, you don't bring out the Shakespeare. Do you try to crack a joke like I might try to do to lighten the mood? Or maybe you just pretend you had no idea that they were suffering and you ignore it and hope that someone much more qualified to help might just happen to come around the corner. What to do becomes a maze of minefields trying to find the answer in our heads. Meanwhile, they're still grieving. They're still hurting. So what do we do? And that's what we're going to discuss today.
Years ago, I had to call one of the vice presidents of our organization about some project or something like that. And I didn't know him well at the time, but I did know he was out of town to be with his father who was dying. Now, I don't know about you, but I never know what to say in those times. So before I called, I practiced a couple of really appropriate things to say. And I mean, they were pretty sharp, if I do say so myself. I was proud. So I make the call, the phone rings, and my mind went completely blank. Oh, it was awful. So I just blurted out, "Hey, Roger, how you doing?" I could tell in his voice that I defended him, and he just said, my father is dying. There's no way to fix that.
No.
So we talked about the business we needed to talk about, and just before we hung up, I said, I got to apologize. I knew about your dad's condition. I even rehearsed some really touching things to say, but as soon as you said hello, my mind went blank, and I blabbed out something stupid, and I'm really sorry. Well, he thought that was hysterical. It gave him a big laugh, and he told me it was okay, and that year I even got a Christmas card from him. Knowing what to say and even what to do is never easy in times of grief.
Which is why today we will hear from 3 people who have dealt with grief and how God helped them through it to hopefully shine a light for us and how we can better react and understand someone who is going through the process of grieving.
So our first guest today is a friend who works with us in Legacy, Sandra Auer. She's been on the receiving end of some good and bad comments while she was grieving.
I was shocked to hear that my son, Mark, who was born with a very significant heart defect, and at 26 years old, just collapsed and died on in their kitchen, on their floor. And when we received the call that Mark had passed, I did wonder how I was going to get through it. And basically it was a day at a time and sometimes a minute at a time. And I've learned that people grieve differently. What works well for some people doesn't necessarily work well for all. For me, what I needed was people to come and sit with me and not tell me how I should feel or what I should think. I had many cards that I opened, and I remember feeling like some actually burned my fingers. They were they hurt me so much, that implied that we should be glad that our son's in heaven, and that's and I wasn't denying those things, the truth of any of those things internally, but that wasn't the point. The point was that we had just lost a son suddenly, who at 26, who was a good man. And the people who helped me most after Mark's death are those who do come alongside, like my friend Susie, who came from Orlando to Dallas, where we were. And another gift was beautiful flowers. I didn't think I cared about flowers, but there's something about that lavish gift that I just remember thinking they must realize how great this loss is if they would honor it in such a way. And I think I can compare that a little bit in my mind biblically with the woman who brought perfume and anointed Jesus with it before he died. That seems to appropriately honor such a great loss. So I guess I would encourage people who, if you know someone who's lost a child or a spouse and you want to help, reach out, send cards, send flowers, go if that's appropriate. Be willing to hear their story, to tell their sorrows, and not have to fix it. Nothing you can say will fix it. Even now, people who realize that losing Mark was a great loss for us, gain for heaven, loss for us. I never doubted that Christ was in the room with me, even if I was alone, humanly, and he has carried us. But don't tell them how they should feel or what they should be thinking. Be available to listen months later, a year later, 2 years later.
You know, we all grieve differently.
Right.
And it's hard to remember that even though you've moved on with your life, the person who is grieving may still struggle with their loss months, even years later.
Right. The best example I thought of for myself was the first time my wife got pregnant. She had a miscarriage.
We went through that too.
Yeah. It was rough for me, but I'm trying this whole time to be there for my wife, to be strong for her. So I was holding all my pain in. So I'm not showing it. But it's still, all that pain is still sitting there. So one day at work, like a week or two in, and my boss at the time asks me a simple question. And I guess my subconscious decided that, hey, this is a great time to just unload all of my pain and anger on this poor, unsuspecting guy.
Oh, no.
And boom, like
man.
the hammer. I let this guy have it for daring to ask me a question while I have just lost a child. I exploded all over him, my shrapnel from my pain. And it wasn't deserved. It made no sense in the moment. So I only hope to react as my boss did in that moment, and he showed me grace.
Oh, good.
So when someone's grieving and they have some sort of sudden outburst like I did, show grace. When all they want to do is cry, show them grace. When they want to do nothing at all and sit there, show grace. And then the other thing it made me think when I was listening to Sandra was, since there's no set answer or set way that any individual person deals with grief, then there also isn't a set answer or a way to how to help them deal with grief, except to ask them. Simply ask the person, how can I help? And then let them know that you're there for them whenever and however they need you. Just be there how they tell you and how they show you that they need you. Because the alternative to doing that can be devastating to them and your relationship with them, as our next guest, Paul Eshelman, found out the hard way.
You know, I guess if you talk about things that I wish I'd done more of in the past, I think you ought to always call people that are hurting. And some of us don't know what to say. A lot of us don't, so we don't call. You don't have to know what to say. They just have to know you're there. I was working in New York City, and there was a secretary that sat outside the door of my office. Her name was Honey. And one day she didn't come to work and said, "Where's Honey?" Her husband died yesterday. So during the next days, I thought I should call her and just tell her I'm sorry, but I didn't. 2 weeks later, she came back to work. And I said, "Honey, I'm so sorry to hear about your husband." And she said, "Yeah, it's been tough. Nobody from the office called. I thought at least you would call." You know, and so now I try when I hear that people have had a loss. I thought about how many people we pass by every day that we don't do anything about. We want people to become Christians. We want to evangelize people, but we don't want to be anybody's friend. And we need to change that. And so when I think about leadership, I want to be a leader in compassion. I want to be a leader in reaching out to people that no one seems to care about.
Now, Bob, the first time I heard Paul tell that story, what struck me hardest was that you can be a great person, a great friend, a great coworker, or boss like Paul was the whole time he worked with that person. And by all measures, Paul, great guy, led
Absolutely.
a great life,
Absolutely.
one that we could all aspire to. But if we fail someone in their moment of grief, it can almost derail everything we built in a relationship in one fell swoop.
Absolutely.
And not just injure what we take a lifetime building a relationship and trust and caring, but when you're like highly respected, like Paul was, it hurts the person even more when you let them down.
Yeah.
So to me, it's very important for me, for Bob, for you to get it right. I have to put aside, any uneasiness I may feel, any awkwardness, any fear of saying the wrong thing, and just make that call that I care. And really, as Christians, we're supposed to be Jesus' hands, right? His representation on earth. That's what we're called to do. And since God said he's near to the brokenhearted and he comforts those who mourn, when I can't literally feel God holding me, I can feel you hugging me. And often, at least for me, that makes all the difference.
Absolutely right. It's amazing what just the simplest gesture can mean to someone. The last folks we're going to hear from today are more than friends to me. Ron and Kathleen Dooley hold a very, very special place in my life and in my heart. And trust me, we can learn a lot from what they have to say about an unbelievably difficult time they went through.
Have you ever had a really bad year? Well, let me tell you about my bad year.
We call it our war of 1997.
I went to the doctor. He examined me and says, Mr. Dooley, I think you might have cancer. Like, cancer? Can't be serious. He says, yes, I can examine you and I could see the tumor and looks like you have to have surgery.
It went from Ron having cancer and the extensive surgery and the results of that surgery on him to him having a gallbladder surgery where he almost died because the gallbladder ruptured.
And I was involved in a discipleship group in our church. And I was sharing sometimes I just really don't sense I have faith. And one of the guys spoke up and he said, you may not feel like you have faith, but if you have a lot of people praying for you.
And so he was home recuperating from that.
And it came back that my white blood cell count was elevated about 3 or 4 times above normal. And he called us back about 11:30 at night and said, Mr. Dooley, I think need to go back into the hospital, like tonight. And after he hung up, I just told Kathleen, I can't go back in the hospital right now. And I just can't do it.
That night, I knew that I needed to let our community group, who had been loving on us in so many ways, I knew I needed to let them know. But it was almost midnight, and I took the phone into the family room and sat down to call our community group leader, but I just couldn't make the call. It was like, I can't make this one more phone call to say, okay, now we have another crisis. And so I'm sitting there with the phone in my hand at 12:15, and it rang. And I was so stunned that I just kind of looked at it, and I picked it up and answered it. And it was our community group leader. And he said, what is going on? And I said, Ken, why? Why did you call? And he said, God woke me up, I guess, and you guys have been on my mind, so I just thought I'd call. And so again, I saw how God just cares for us in ways that we don't even know. And so we prayed over the phone, and Ken alerted the rest of the community group at 12:30 at night, and everyone was praying.
And so we prayed. We asked God to take care of this. I went to the hospital. They took the blood work, and the white blood cell count was perfectly normal. And I can't help but believe that God healed me at that point.
It's like the scripture says that God gives us grace as we need it. And he knows what we need and when we need it. And I think at that point, God knew we had reached our limit, and he stepped in. And we just watched God care for our family through other people.
We were with our church small group as a Wednesday night, and I got a call from Brian, our oldest son, saying that grandma has had a massive cerebral hemorrhage, and they had planned to have a memorial service to Cincinnati. And our small group, many of whom worked for airlines, got together enough what they call buddy passes to send me up that night. And I remember I was alone in my parents' home. I began to ask myself, what do I really believe about God right now? And it's like I had 3 major hits that summer in a 2-month period. I didn't have an answer right then. But the next day, I pulled into a parking space and looked at the car next to us. And there were 3 of our friends from our small group who flown up to be with us. It's like right then, God was saying to me, I love you. And right now, I'm showing you that love through other people. People who really care for you.
God just used the hands of those people to minister to us. And it was just a beautiful time for us to see the community of God working together.
I guess I'm just reminded of what Jesus said in John 13, where he says, all men will know that you're my disciples because of the love they have for one another. And some of his disciples are showing that love to me. And that is always struck me. The importance of God's family, upholding one another when they're down. You know, not coming down harshly on them, but loving them, praying for them, and caring for them.
You know, we shot this interview with Ron and Kathleen. I think it was like 18 years after they'd gone through this experience. And yet the impact of their friends' love was so profound that it still moved them. It still moves them today, and you know, especially when we recorded it.
Yeah, you could see it on their face.
Oh yeah, the tears still welled up.
It was still there.
Absolutely. Paul taught us the importance of simply showing up. People need to know that you care. From Sandra, we learned how important it is to allow someone to grieve the way they need to grieve. And don't try to fake it. Platitudes don't work. Nobody expects you to have the right answers. No. Even if you did, they'd probably not be at the right time for someone to hear them anyway. Just be available. And then Ron and Kathleen, wow, how blessed they are to have such supportive friends. Those folks prayed for them, encouraged them, and they were there for them. Kathleen said, we watched God care for our family through other people. Isn't that what we all want? To let God work through us in ways that allow others to see his love in us?
Right. We all want to be there for others when they're hurting, right? All of us. And yet, so often I, and I'm sure many of you listening, find an excuse not to reach out. And again, they think there's someone better suited out there to help them in their pain. But I've learned, especially through listening to people who go through grief like today, that there isn't someone else. Yeah. That I am the person God has put in their lives. I am told by God to represent him in the world. And we all know what God would do for the hurting. He literally helped hurting people almost every day of his ministry.
He even did that on the cross.
Yeah. So when you see someone grieving, tell them you care. Be there for them however they tell you they need it. And then my other thought was, I think we should just check in from time to time, because there is no set time grieving ends. There's no getting over the loss of a loved one. It's permanent this side of heaven, and so too is the pain. Because I know sometimes my answer might be, I'm okay, when they ask me. Thanks, I'm okay. But I'm not okay, right? I mean, we all know I'm not okay if I'm grieving and I'm hurting and I just lashed out at my boss. He knows I wasn't okay. And so just offering to hang out, to not be alone, to be there with me in it is enough. And we already spoke to God's part in grief in the last episode. So if you haven't gotten a chance to hear that one on suffering, please do. It's got some cool insight. And one of them is that grief and that kind of pain isn't physical or even mental, that it's soul deep.
Yeah.
Only God can deal with the soul. Only God can heal them or offer ultimate comfort to the soul. So that's not our job. It can't be. So our job is simple. Just be there and let them know you care and that they're not alone. And then let God do what only He can. So that wraps up our episode on how to comfort someone who is grieving. We hope you feel better equipped now, at least a little better, to be there for others in their pain. I know I do.
Our hope with 78.4 is that it'll help you flourish in your relationship with Jesus and with others. That's why we include the links to articles and tools in our show notes as a way of helping you grow in Him and build toward your legacy. So please check out our show notes. And also, please email us. Are you struggling with grief? Or are you struggling for ways to help someone who is? Let us know.
And the audio you heard today comes from some of the more than 600 and growing videos on our website, legacy.cru.org. That's legacy.cru.org. We also have a YouTube channel, Cru Legacy, and a Facebook page. Please check them out. And if you like today's podcast, we ask that you please subscribe so you can get the next one, and the next one, and yes, Bob, the next one.
The next one.
Also, please rate us. It helps others hear about our podcast.
78.4 is a podcast of Legacy, a project of Cru.
Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. And while we're away, we want to encourage you to remember that whatever God did in the lives of the people you heard speak today, He can do in you, and even more. So until we're together again, go out there and continue the legacy.